Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hollywood Remembers video. Today, we're going to pay a heartfelt tribute to the American stars we've recently lost, as well as other beloved figures around the world who have touched our lives. Before we begin, if this content resonates with you, please leave a like. It helps the channel continue bringing you tributes made with respect and care. Thank you for being here. Now let's begin. Greg Brown was a folk singer, songwriter, and guitarist from Iowa. He was born on July 2, 1949, in Fairfield, Iowa. And on February 8, 2026, Greg Brown passed away. For a lot of people, Greg Brown's voice felt like home. Not flashy, not rushed, just steady, worn in, and honest. The kind of voice that sounded like it had lived a life before it ever reached a microphone. He sang about small towns, long drives, hard days, and quiet moments that most people don't think to write down. Somehow, he always found the words. He came up in Iowa and stayed close to it, even as his music traveled far beyond the Midwest. Greg didn't chase trends. He didn't need to. His songs were built on simple melodies, acoustic guitars, and lyrics that paid attention to people, to places, to time passing. Listeners didn't just hear his songs, they recognized themselves in them. A job that wore you down, a relationship that almost worked, a stretch of road you'd driven 100 times, still thinking about the same things. Greg Brown had a way of making ordinary life feel worth listening to, worth remembering. Now he's gone, but the songs remain. Quiet, patient, and real. Still waiting for someone to press play.
William Billy Bass Nelson Jr. was an American musician best known as the original bassist of Funkadelic. He was born on January 28, 1951, in Plainfield, New Jersey. On January 31, 2026, just days after his 75th birthday, Billy Bass Nelson passed away. When Funkadelic was still taking shape, Billy was there at the foundation. His bass wasn't just holding the rhythm together, it pushed, pulled, and spoke back. Thick lines, deep grooves, a sound that felt loose on the surface but was locked in tight underneath. That early Funkadelic sound didn't happen by accident. It happened because musicians like Billy knew how to listen to each other. He helped set the tone for a band that refused to stay in one lane. Funk, rock, soul, psychedelia, all of it blended together, carried by a rhythm section that never let go. In 1997, Billy Bass Nelson was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alongside 15 other members of Parliament Funkadelic. It was recognition not just of fame, but of influence, of how far that music reached. Billy may not have always been in the spotlight, but his sound was always there, and it still is, in the grooves, in the records, in the way funk is played today. That legacy doesn't fade. It keeps moving. Catherine O'Hara was a Canadian actress, comedian, and voice performer whose career stretched across more than 50 years. She was born on March 4, 1954, in Toronto, Canada. Catherine O'Hara passed away on January 30, 2026, in Los Angeles, California. For generations of audiences, Catherine had a rare gift. She could make people laugh without forcing it. A look, a pause, a line delivered just slightly off-center. Her comedy felt smart, human, and deeply observed. She understood people, their awkwardness, their pride, their vulnerability, and she played all of it with warmth. Her career moved easily between film, television, and voice work, never confined to one lane. Over the years, her work was recognized with many honors, including a Genie Award, a Golden Globe, 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards, 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, and 6 Canadian Screen Awards. But awards were never the reason people loved her. They loved her because she made characters feel real, even when they were larger than life. Catherine O'Hara brought heart into comedy.
She showed that humor could be sharp without being cruel, and funny without losing compassion. Now she's gone, but her performances remain, still making people laugh, still surprising them, still reminding us how powerful quiet brilliance can be.
Dwight Yoakam is more than a country music icon. He is a story about persistence, about choosing identity before approval, and conviction before comfort. This is not a tale about chart positions, trophies, or the flash of success. It is about becoming, about what happens when the path you're told to follow no longer fits and you decide to walk anyway. Dwight Yoakam was born into a world where music wasn't a dream, it was a backdrop. Kentucky hills, working-class routines, a sense that tradition mattered, not because it was trendy, but because it was lived. His environment did not announce greatness. It taught survival, discipline, and quiet pride. Nothing theatrical, nothing romanticized. At home, there were competing forces shaping him. On one side, expectation, stability, the unspoken rule that you earn your place by keeping your head down and doing the work. On the other, expression, feeling, a sense that emotion needed somewhere to go, even if it didn't have a clear destination. He grew up between those poles, structure and sensitivity, learning early that neither alone was enough. Music arrived not as rebellion, but as refuge. It gave form to feeling without requiring explanation. It allowed him to speak without arguing, to feel without justifying. Singing was not about being heard, it was about staying intact. As a young man, Dwight did what many ambitious artists are told to do. He went where success was supposed to live. Nashville, the promised land of country music, the place where tradition was preserved and, say paradoxically, guarded. But Nashville did not welcome him. His sound was too sharp, too influenced by honky-tonk, Buck Owens, Bakersfield grit, too raw, too emotional, too different. Record labels listened and declined. Producers advised him to soften, to modernize, to blend. What they were really asking was simpler and harder. They wanted him to adjust his identity. This is the first quiet turning point in Dwight Yoakam's story. Not fame, not failure, a choice. Instead of reshaping himself to fit a mold, he walked away. Los Angeles was not the obvious alternative. It wasn't a country town. It didn't promise acceptance. But it offered something more important, space. Space to build without permission. To play to crowds that didn't care what rules he was breaking, because they weren't guarding them in the first place. There, in small clubs and unconventional rooms, Dwight forged his sound in real time, not chasing trends, not competing for approval, just refining what already felt true. His talent became armor, not against critics but against erasure. Every performance was an assertion. This is who I am. Humor, edge, vulnerability. They weren't tactics, they were tools of survival. When success finally arrived, it came fast. Albums resonated, songs climbed, audiences grew. But the ascent mattered less than the foundation. Unlike stories where growth outruns readiness, Dwight had already built his inner structure. He didn't discover himself after success. He protected himself before it. This chapter of his life is not about winning. It is about not disappearing. Long before awards, before sold-out arenas, before his name became shorthand for authenticity, Dwight Yoakam had already made his most consequential decision. He chose coherence over convenience. That choice doesn't guarantee applause, but it guarantees something rarer. It guarantees that when the spotlight finally finds you, there's already someone there to stand in it. Dwight Yoakam did not enter success quietly. His arrival felt deliberate, almost corrective, like a sound that had been waiting years for permission to exist. The albums hit with confidence, not novelty. They didn't ask to be liked. They assumed their place, and audiences responded, not because it was new, but because it was familiar in a way that felt honest. The ache of honky-tonk, the restraint of classic country, the tension between Polish and grit. Momentum followed, tours expanded, sales climbed, recognition arrived without apology. Yet something subtle happened beneath the surface. As visibility increased, so did pressure. Not to improve, but to conform. Industry voices returned with warmer smiles and the same old suggestions. More crossover, more smoothing, less edge. The irony was sharp. He was now successful because he hadn't listened. And yet the expectations grew louder precisely when the stakes rose. Dwight stayed still. He didn't frame it as resistance. There was no manifesto, just consistency. Album after album, he honored the sound he trusted. Sometimes that meant sacrificing reach. Sometimes that meant slower momentum. But it preserved something fragile: alignment. This era reveals a truth rarely dramatized. Sustaining success is not about momentum, it's about limits. Knowing how far you'll go before the work stops being yours. While many artists chase visibility, Dwight seemed more concerned with permanence, not relevance in the moment, but credibility across time. He wasn't interested in becoming unavoidable. He wanted to remain believable. Acting entered his life the same way music had, not as reinvention, but extension. Film sets offered another language, another discipline, another way to inhabit character without spectacle. Roles came quietly, often textured, often restrained. No attempt to dominate the screen, just to belong on it. That restraint mirrored his music, a refusal to overstate, a preference for implication over declaration. There is a misconception that artists who avoid reinvention lack range. Dwight Yoakam challenged that quietly. His range was internal. It showed in restraint, in refusal, in patience. He didn't pivot every season. He deepened. But deepening comes with solitude. As trends shifted, new names rose faster. Sounds changed. Algorithms favored novelty. Dwight didn't compete. He continued. For some, that read as fading. For others, it felt like loyalty to a lineage, to a sound, to an internal compass. This is where the story grows quieter. No scandals, no dramatic collapses. Just the steady weight of maintaining integrity while the world encourages flexibility. The cost was invisibility at times. The benefit was peace. There is a particular kind of confidence that develops when applause is no longer your primary signal. It doesn't announce itself, it settles. Dwight seemed to carry that confidence, not loud, not defiant, just resolved. What sustains him through this chapter is not ambition, but clarity. He knows what his work is for, not validation, not ubiquity, but expression that survives repetition. Many careers burn brightly and briefly because they're fueled by urgency. Dwight's endurance suggests a different fuel, self-knowledge. And yet, even with that stability, tension remains. Staying whole does not mean staying untouched. Time brings its own demands. Audiences project nostalgia. Expectations fossilize. You become a symbol of something you're still actively living. This is the pressure of longevity. Not falling apart, but not being frozen. Dwight Yoakam's middle years are not defined by decline or reinvention, but by navigation, between legacy and presence, between honoring what was and allowing what still is. The question becomes quieter but heavier. How do you remain yourself when the world already decided who you are? Dwight Yoakam never became louder to compete with the noise. If anything, his presence grew more measured, less concerned with reaction, more attentive to resonance. By this stage, his name no longer needed introduction. It carried associations, authenticity, tradition, restraint. For many artists, that kind of recognition becomes a trap. Expectations harden. Listeners stop hearing the work as it is and begin hearing it as a reminder of what once was. Dwight understood that risk without dramatizing it. He didn't fight nostalgia, but he didn't feed it blindly either. Instead, he positioned himself somewhere subtler, acknowledging the past while refusing to perform it as a museum piece. His work continued, sometimes under the radar, sometimes resurfacing with quiet strength, always consistent in tone. Consistency, however, can be misunderstood as comfort. From the outside it may appear settled. Internally it requires constant negotiation, to repeat without stagnating, to evolve without abandoning, to remain present while being remembered. This chapter of his life is defined less by output than by tension. There is the tension between independence and relevance, between solitude and connection, between having nothing left to prove and still needing something to say. Dwight's artistry matured into something leaner, less interested in assertion, more focused on clarity. The work no longer tried to establish identity, it assumed it. That assumption freed him from urgency, but replaced it with responsibility. Because when you are seen as a standard, every choice feels weighted. He never positioned himself as a spokesperson for tradition, yet audiences projected that role onto him. Keeper of the sound. Last of a lineage. These labels came with admiration, but also confinement. Being admired for what you preserve can limit what you're allowed to explore. Dwight navigated that by remaining inwardly oriented. Decisions weren't made to satisfy an era, but to stay aligned with himself. That alignment often required saying no to expectations, to easy wins, to louder versions of success. Acting continued alongside music, not as escape but as balance. The camera offered silence, subtext, a different rhythm. Where music carried emotion outward, film allowed it to sit unresolved. This duality protected him from being defined by one dimension. Still, the long arc brings its own questions. What happens when your influence outpaces your visibility? When your work continues, but the spotlight searches elsewhere? For some, this registers as loss. For Dwight, it seemed to register as adjustment, an acceptance that visibility is seasonal but purpose isn't, that the work doesn't need to dominate conversation to remain meaningful. This posture doesn't generate headlines, it generates steadiness, and yet beneath that steadiness lies a human reality. Time narrows the margin. Energy becomes selective. The question shifts from what else can I do to what still matters enough to do well. This is not retreat, it's refinement. Dwight Yoakam's later career demonstrates a form of success rarely framed as such: sustainability without dilution, engagement without exhaustion, expression without performance anxiety. The internal conflict here is quiet but persistent. Not ego versus humility, but relevance versus authenticity. The temptation to reassert versus the discipline to remain truthful. He doesn't dramatize this struggle publicly. There's no announcement, no reinvention campaign. Just continued work done deliberately away from spectacle, and in that choice, something becomes clear. His legacy was never going to be a single era, sound, or image. It would be a pattern, a way of moving through a career without surrendering authorship. This chapter doesn't end with resolution. It pauses with awareness, because the final transformation is not about maintaining success, but redefining what success even means when ambition is no longer the engine. Dwight Yoakam arrives at the later chapters of his life without spectacle. No grand farewell, no victory lap, just continuity, chosen, not inherited. At this point, the world's expectations are clear. He is meant to represent something finished, a sound locked in amber, a memory that comforts more than it challenges. That expectation is subtle, almost polite, and that's what makes it dangerous. It invites compliance disguised as respect. Dwight doesn't comply. He also doesn't rebel. Instead, he reframes. This final phase is not about proving vitality. It's about discernment, about understanding that longevity isn't sustained by noise, but by precision. He no longer needs to demonstrate relevance, he needs to remain honest. The work that emerges here feels lighter, but not thinner, less concerned with imprinting the moment, more interested in telling the truth cleanly. Every note carries intention, every appearance has purpose. Absence becomes a choice, not a consequence. There is a quiet confidence in that restraint. Public perception often mistakes fewer appearances for withdrawal, but withdrawal implies avoidance. What Dwight displays is selection, a narrowing toward what matters, a deliberate refusal to confuse presence with purpose. This is where his story shifts from career to character. Legacy is often misunderstood as something you leave behind, but in its truest form, it's something you practice. It shows up in how you carry yourself when applause softens, in how you speak when headlines don't listen, in whether you keep working when no one demands it. Dwight's legacy is not a catalogue, it's a posture. He becomes, more clearly now, a student of his own life, not correcting the past, not rewriting it, simply integrating it, the mistakes, the refusals, the endurance. All of it folded into a steadier sense of self. There is no public reckoning here, no dramatic apology or redemption arc, just accountability expressed through consistency, through staying aligned, through refusing to outsource meaning. In this phase, fatherhood, manhood, and artistry stop competing. They converge. Identity is no longer fragmented by roles. The work is not an escape from the self, it is an extension of it. That integration changes the energy of everything he touches. Music becomes conversation rather than declaration. Acting becomes listening rather than performance. Presence becomes quieter, but deeper. This is the stage few stories show because it doesn't spike engagement quickly, but it sustains something rarer, respect that doesn't expire. Dwight Yoakam does not end as a monument. He remains a person in motion, still choosing, still refining, still learning where his voice belongs. And perhaps that is the most instructive part of his journey, because the greatest transformation was never professional. It was internal. From someone seeking a place within tradition to someone who carries tradition without being confined by it. The arc completes not with triumph but with coherence. Talent became craft. Craft became expression. Expression became understanding. In the end, the most demanding role was never on stage or screen. It was the lifelong discipline of becoming whole. And that role, quiet, untelevised, deeply human, is the one he continues to play.